Hey class, we are going to talk about your second reading reflections dealing with chapter 2 of the Corcoran text. I'm not going to address all of the prompts, but I do want to say a few things. The first thing I wanted to address, part of philosophy, so this is like a general comment, not necessarily on the sort of topic of dualism and materialism, but philosophy, one of the goals, and one of the things I think that's important for what I do both with my undergrad students and also in our GTO program, philosophy is sort of intended to teach people how to have rational dialogue, and maybe even more importantly, rational disagreement. And we don't have very good models of this, at least in the US. So when you turn on a political debate, it's often not rational discourse. It's often ad hominem attacks. It's how to get elected. It's more about rhetoric than it is about discovering truth and really making solid critiques and putting forth solid ideas. Again, if you turn on AM radio and you listen to either conservatives or liberals, not a lot of rational dialogue. They're telling you who to blame, who's at fault. Whatever a Republican does is great. If it's a conservative station, whatever a Democrat does has to be wrong. If you listen to a Democratic station, every single thing the Republicans do is wrong. Everything that Democrats do is right. Not a lot of real critical thinking going on, not a lot of rational dialogue. Same thing if you look often at religious circles. We look at other denominations, we name call, we label them. Where I'm at in the Pacific Northwest, I hear a lot of Christians bad-mouthing Mormons. There's just not good models for how to really disagree with one another and yet do it with kindness, with civility, with humility. In my own church, when people disagree, it's often not done well. To their face, it's like, oh, okay, I guess we'll agree to disagree. Then there's gossip. People are called heretics or dangerous. And there's all kinds of things that go on. And so philosophy, in some sense, is to say, look, what do you believe? Okay, lay it out. Why? Can you support this? Why do you believe these things? And then someone comes along and says, oh, I see that logic. I disagree. I respect you. I can see where you're going. In fact, I agree with these premises, these points. But we diverge here. And so this is why I disagree and why I believe what I do. And you do it in a way that where you're critical. I mean, philosophers make arguments that tell people why they think they're wrong, but we typically do it, at least when we do it well, with respect. We do it in a sense with humility. We don't have all the answers, but this is where I'm at in my life and why I disagree with you. And I hope that this course can be sort of a venue for this kind of rational discourse, and that it might enter into our churches, our homes, our communities, in politics, that it slowly but surely might gain ground where when I disagree with someone, I can go to them and say, you know, I've heard these things. Can you explain to me what you really think or what you really said? And I want to listen to you, right? And then if we end up disagreeing, we can do that well. Same thing with my wife. But I often don't do that. I get very emotional. I get very defensive. And it ends up not being rational discourse. What I've liked so far, when I look at the discussion board, is the discourse has been very rational. There's been disagreements. You're not all posting the same stuff, but it's been really respectful. I sense humility throughout. These are real Christian virtues, and I think they're philosophical virtues as well. So I appreciate that, and I hope that that's something that's being cultivated. Sometimes students have a hard time speaking up because they don't want to seem critical, like in peer responses or in class. Well, you can disagree with someone and do it respectfully, right? Don't feel bad about disagreeing or asking someone a question or putting someone to the fire a little bit, right? This is how we grow and how we learn as long as we do it in love. So that was my first point. Second thing, I get the sense that some of you don't really see why this discourse is a big deal, the one we're having now. Dualism, the various forms, materialism. Like, who cares? It doesn't really matter. One can be a Christian in either case. It doesn't seem to impact core doctrines that much. Not all of you, but some of you seem to have that attitude, and that's okay. It's my job to sort of communicate why I think this is really important. And I think when we talk about what it means to be a human person, what is the essence of human nature, I think it really, really matters, and the arguments really matter. This is not simply a matter of faith, although faith might play a role. Can we support one of these views more strongly than others? Are there better arguments for one as opposed to some of the others, right? We start to talk about probability. I can't guarantee you there's a soul, but can I make a rational argument that supports my view and says it's reasonable? That's what we're trying to get at, right? But a lot's at stake. If you reject dualism and you go to a more materialistic framework, can we defend life after death? Is that something that goes away if materialism is true, or some kind of materialism? Can we talk seriously about the divinity of Jesus? Can God be a non-physical or spiritual entity without some kind of dualism being true? Right? Is God physical? Does God have a body? If not, do we have to embrace dualism? You get the idea, right? These are big, important questions. At the same time, when I look at something like Descartes' dualism, where the soul is my identity, that's where I think, that's where my memory is, that's where my personality is, that's where my moral compass comes from. The body just sort of houses the soul, very much sort of, dismisses the body in many respects. This argument seems to run counter to the evidence that was pointed to in my last lecture. And if you're not listening to my lectures, I strongly encourage you to. I think they'll really help. And so I gave a lecture. I suggested you listen to it on Wednesday regarding materialism. But in there, I tried to talk about some of this evidence that's mounting in neuroscience that suggests that who I am is fundamentally tied to how my brain works. When my frontal lobe is damaged, I become a different person. Some people are born with a brain that functions differently, hormone levels that are different. And they do not have the same capacity as someone whose brain functions differently. It can be greater or less. There are some people who don't feel the same horror at the sign of violence, blood, and distress. Those people are more prone to violence. And part of it is related to how their brain is structured. If the part of my brain that's dedicated to memory is injured, I lose my memory. It doesn't seem that personality, moral compass, all these things are just my soul, but are fundamentally tied to my body. So the evidence suggests that maybe Descartes' form of dualism is wrong, that it doesn't add up, right? Because there are certain things we can get our hands on and really get evidence and data for, and I think science is helping us understand ourselves, our bodies, and our brains better. And that's something we can know, and I think Descartes' arguments don't really fit this new evidence. But then there are other things where it becomes more speculative. This brain science certainly doesn't prove there's not a soul or a non-physical element to the world or to the universe or to me. But it simply says that whatever this non-physical element is, it seems to be fundamentally tied to my body, right? So there are some things we can know, and our philosophical arguments, if they're strong, need to be compatible with this evidence that we do know. And yet, we don't have to reduce all of our arguments to what we currently know. We can speculate, and we can leaps of faith from this evidence. But our faith probably shouldn't run contrary to it. And when Descartes does, I think we might want to reject that. So materialism seems to reject the non-physical reality of God. Materialism has a hard time with life after death. Materialism might have a struggle with Christ's dual nature and his divinity. That creates problems for Christians. Yet Descartes' form of dualism also runs counter to evidence, so we're running into problems. Maybe some of our options are being narrowed. And so this stuff really matters. And how we view the human person matters. I'll give another example. My experience growing up in the church, Christians tended to devalue, not put any importance on mental illness. Many Christians I still know, medication, we over-medicate ourselves, it doesn't really help people, it's just a crutch. We need to pray more. Some people even talk about mental illness in terms of demon possession still, that this is really a spiritual thing, that we overestimate the brain and its importance. But these arguments are fundamentally tied to how we see the person, right? This extreme separation between body and soul the soul is what really matters, and prayer and reading scripture and whatnot is where real healing takes place. And I think this is problematic, and I want to say, no, we need to have a holistic understanding of the person, right? A holistic, where the body and the brain are taken seriously, and medication can give hope to many people, not just medication, but medication along with counseling, loving communities that help structure their lives in redemptive ways. I mean, these things really matter, but we have to take the body and the brain seriously if we're going to see the human person this way. And I think this is going to be so impactful for spiritual formation, because spiritual formation, in my mind, has to take into account our bodies, what we do with our bodies, how we are forming our brains, which is predicated on what we think and what we do, what we set our minds on. And that's the only way I'm going to really change and develop as a person. It's not just going to be some detached form of spirituality. So I don't want you to take the perspective that these arguments don't matter. I think they really do. And while we might not be able to land on one as the absolute truth, we might be able to eliminate certain ones as either being fundamentally contrary to Christianity or as being contrary to current evidence, which might narrow our scope and move us in a good direction towards truth. So I hope that this sort of helps, right? I want you to be passionate about this and to care deeply about these arguments. I know not everyone will, but that's my hope. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you online.